You never imagined it would happen to you. Friends experience the grief of divorce for a variety of reasons. But because you trust and love your mate, you never think you'll be another statistic, another bad marriage. But looking at divorce numbers, particularly in the present period, I question why people marry in the first place. I suppose I should have noticed the indications, but not based on what I read online. Whether it's tales, articles, or simply becoming more aware. When you're in love with someone, you tend to see the world through rose-colored glasses. When you marry, you have children, a home, and a shared existence. The prospect of getting old together is unsettling. But the signals were there, and I had noticed them before. I grew up in a home that was finally classified as a single-parent family. Growing up, my parents' marriage appeared strong. They appeared to love and respect one another. My father worked hard. The physically rigorous task exhausted him. But he loved his wife and family, and gave himself for what I suppose could be called the greater good. My mother returned to work as soon as my younger sister went to school. As children, we had no concept what was happening. But in retrospect, I soon recognized some of the indications. And that's when I figured it all out. She did not begin having an affair right away. I was a teenager when it began. My brother was 18 months younger. And my younger sister was 3 years younger. It began the way many romances do. Initially, it was working late. Then there are business travels, showers. As soon as she returned home from an afternoon with her sweetheart, she dressed nicer than she had ever done for our father. And, because this was before smartphones, my mother would make hidden phone calls and disappear at strange hours for her contacts. My father only found out about their affair after he walked in on them. I later learnt that he had finished work early in order to surprise my mother by bringing her out for the afternoon, who informed him that she was taking a half day to do her hair and go shopping. Instead, he returned home to find her car in the driveway, as well as another car that he claimed he knew. He parked along the street and walked home. Entering through the back door and walking into the bedroom, he discovered his wife, my mother, being entertained by her boss in their marital bed. My father lost his rage and harmed him. His name was Jim Thompson, and he crawled out of our house battered. My father quickly realized that adultery meant nothing in a culture where no-fault divorce was the norm. Some claim that possession constitutes 9 to 10 of the law. My father tried to kick her out of the house, packing her belongings and sending her to my parents. When they learned what she had done, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her sister refused to take her in because the house was in both her and my father's names. She refused to move in. My father was caught between a hammer and an anvil. If he had remained, divorce would have been impossible. A husband and wife must live separately for 12 months, that is, live in different places before obtaining a divorce. My father attempted to evict my mother numerous than once due to her adultery. But this was not a crime, and she had every right to remain in the residence. Yes, no-fault divorces can be bad since, in the instance of infidelity, one partner is at fault for the divorce. And leaving the marriage without being punished for breaking their vows feels harsh. My father eventually gave up on not wanting to live in the same house as his cheating wife. He found an apartment and moved out. He couldn't find an apartment big enough for all 3 of us. So we ended up living with my mother. I figured out what was going on and quickly told my mother what I thought of her. She tried to explain her reasoning, but I informed her I was going to go live with my father as soon as possible. My small brother and sister had not been informed anything, so they were left wondering why my father had departed. I attempted to explain everything to them without engaging in a conversation. The one nice thing my mother had done that year was to continue our visits with my father. For the first few months, he was broken. He did his best to put up a pleasant face for his children. However, being the oldest, we could see that the smile was forced. He sat me down at the table one night after my siblings had gone to bed and admitted that we were the only reason he was still around. He would, however, battle for custody and, if possible, a place to live. However, it was only a pipe dream. Men were rarely granted custody back then. And when it came time for divorce after 12 months of separation, they had to go to court to settle custody and other matters. When I was old enough to appear in court, I indicated unequivocally that I wanted to live with my dad. However, because my brother and sister were deemed too young to make that decision, even though the judge accepted their word for it, custody of all three of us was granted to my mother. The only silver lining for my father is that there is no alimony in Australia, albeit there is spousal maintenance. However, it is not usually awarded. And because our mother was already working well, he simply had to pay fair alimony. In Australia, unlike in the United States, child support is reasonable for the parent who is left the household, so that my father would not be left impoverished due to child support payments. The next 4 years proved difficult. I already despised my mother and she knew it. I informed each man she attempted to present as her new partner that my mother was a whore who had cheated on her husband, forcing him to leave the family home. More than time, I left her in tears. By the time I was 16, we scarcely spoke, and I left the house as much as possible for school, a part-time job, or simply not turning up. Following the divorce, my father rebuilt his life and eventually met a lovely woman named Naomi, his fellow divorcee. I encouraged their relationship, and she eventually came to love his 3 children as her own. She had her own children, and we treated her like a sister. Despite the heartache, I was relieved that my father had found love again. Even though I knew he was apprehensive to marry, Naomi seems to understand this and joyfully consented to cohabitate. They eventually rented a place together and formed a de facto relationship. As soon as I became 18 and graduated from high school, I moved out of my father's home. I loathed leaving my siblings, the only reason I remained in the house until that age. But by then my connection with my mother had deteriorated. My final comments to her were, I'll admit, extremely cruel, but they were simply an explosion of all the terrible sentiments I'd been harboring inside me since my father was forced to leave home simply because he didn't want to stay married to a cheating whore. Despite the end of our relationship, she grieved as I packed my car the day I left. I hugged my brother and sister, assuring them that I would be there for them and would not abandon them. And then I took one final look at my mother. The experience with my mother made me leery of dealing with women. I'd read a lot of articles regarding infidelity and knew that I was a monogamous person at heart and expected the same from my partner. I had a few girlfriends in high school, but after I started working and earning money, I began dating, hoping to find a woman worthy of my love and trust. I met Kylie when I was 21. She was a recent university graduate. I was working as an engineer and taking night school because, while I enjoyed working with my hands, I hoped to advance through the organization to a managerial position. I met her at one of the corporate gigs representing an engineering company where she was working part-time as a sales representative for a supply company. We hit it off right away. And by the end of the day I had her number in my phone and promised to call. Mark, are you on a hot date? My roommate asked. He was one of my closest high school friends. And we had decided to live together so the rent and costs would be lower, something like that. Dave, is this the same female you met at the conference? Yeah. I eventually worked up the confidence to phone her. I stared at him with a smirk. Back off, Dave, I merely waited a few days so I wouldn't appear aggressive. Trust me, she was quite eager on the phone when I phoned her and wanted to meet up as soon as possible. After applying some aftershave, I realized I looked good. It's better than looking like a bum anyway. Although I had a respectable work, the pay wasn't tremendous, but I was comfortable enough. We decided to meet at one of the town's bars and proceeded on a case-by-case basis. I didn't normally plan dinner and drinks for first dates. Too many stories about ladies looking for free food. The man who paid for it will never hear about it again. She was sitting on a stool in the pub as I walked in after parking. She was already sipping her drink and met my stare across the room when her eyes brightened and she smiled. My heart seemed to beat faster after a few drinks. We gradually came to know each other. She stated that her position in the corporation was transitory and that she was only hired because she had a beautiful face that drew guys to her. She chuckled, conceding the truth. But it made her feel like a piece of meat and so many married men pursued me. She said it was disgusting. I understood her point. I know my own mother cheated. But both sexes were equally horrible at cheating, out of personal curiosity. I looked up statistics online and I was surprised to see how many men and women acknowledged to having extramarital affairs. Making matters worse, numerous Australian articles described us as a bunch of cheating scumbags. You were the perfect gentleman, Mark. She added, holding my hand in her own. You maintained staring me in the eye the entire time and were totally professional. At least until you asked for my phone number. You were the only sincere individual. I wish you were single, however. I placed my hand over my heart and raised the other hand. I swear I'm single. Ask any of my buddies. She grinned and grabbed my hand again. Good, because I have a positive vibe about you. I have already been hurt. We agreed to take things slowly. During the first several weeks, we met for coffee or cocktails at the conclusion of the third night. We shared our first kiss. By then, she was already aware of my parents' connection. She hugged me fiercely and I felt better in my heart. When we kissed, I knew that was the correct thing to do. When I met her stare, I could see she was thinking the same thing. Drinks turned into dinner. 1 week later, she returned to the apartment I shared with Dave. He had his own girlfriend and spent the majority of his time at her house, so he was thankfully not present. After one final drink, I took her hand and we made love for the first time. A month later, she expressed her love for me. I reciprocated and things continued from there. When she secured a solid job, we started talking about serious things like living together, buying a house, marrying and having children. Even though I was still thinking about what had happened to my father, Kylie had already captured my heart and that was all that counted. She was a pleasure to be around and she stated that her primary goals were to be a wife and mother. Before we married, we decided to buy a house jointly. Fortunately, this occurred before the housing boom that was sweeping Australia, particularly Sydney. However, due to her lack of job and a poor credit history, which she informed me about, she was unable to co-borrow on the mortgage. I could not afford such a mortgage and no bank would lend it to me on my own, so my father advised I become a co-borrower so that his income would support mine. I had no idea how much it would save my ass in the long run, but Kylie was grateful to him right now and almost wept when he told her she was just like any other daughter. At the same time, her parents really adored me. So I proposed barely 3 months after moving into our new house. Everyone was ecstatic when we revealed our engagement and wedding date. Marrying Kylie was the happiest day of my life until that moment. I married the woman I believed I was my soulmate and she frequently told me I was hers. Walking down the aisle toward her, I was undoubtedly grinning like a fool. She began giggling as I took her hand and we were both relieved that we had finally committed to each other. This was not a church wedding. It was in a park with a marquee adjacent for the reception. Our honeymoon was a week-long trip to a Pacific island with sun, sea, and sand. Not surprisingly, we discovered that was when she became pregnant with our first child. 9 months after our honeymoon, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and was ready for more children. 6 months since giving delivery, After 18 months, she gave birth to our son. 3 months later, we decided that was enough. We each got what we wanted. To my astonishment, she did not want me to undergo surgery in case we changed our minds. She didn't want her tubes tied either. She simply consented to go back on birth control, because it had never affected her before. And life continued as usual. She was a housewife and mother, till her 2 children started school. As soon as our son got to school, she resumed working but limited her hours to school hours until both children entered middle school. Only then did she return to full-time work. By the time we were 45, I was already working as a regional manager for a nationwide network of engineering firms. I traveled frequently but rarely stayed at home longer than one night. Kylie worked in real estate and operated her own office. Despite periodic trips to the main office in the CBD, our daughter Charlotte moved home to live with her boyfriend. He was a handsome young man who had already committed to her. I assumed wedding bells were on the horizon. Our son Stephen was still at university and lived in an apartment close to campus. I was aware of his numerous interests, but Kylie and I stood behind him regardless of his life decisions. We'd been married for more than 20 years at this point. I had the impression that we were still in love. Just like the day we spoke our vows, I kept my gaze fixed on him, my hand on my heart. I could stare at another lady, but I never considered doing anything because I had given Kylie my heart and did not want to betray her trust. But I couldn't control myself. I was continuously thinking about what happened to my father. I should have known better. I should have noticed the indications. But when I finally accepted the reality, I felt I needed to take some precautions to prepare for the inevitable. You simply never believe it will happen to you. Do you think she is cheating on you? Asked Dave about the astonishment in his tone. But he adores you to death. Dave, why on earth was I blind? I assumed that once Steve left home, our relationship would return to normal. But I'm starting to see that she's acting like my mother did with my father. Even thinking about that slut made my blood boil. I hadn't seen her in over 2 decades. She had attended my wedding, but only because my father intervened. He'd married Naomi by then and was long retired. He advised me to become a better man and invite her. I didn't have to invite her, but not doing so would make me look awful. I clenched my teeth and mailed her the invitation. Other than emailing her about her grandchildren whom she rarely saw, I had nothing to do with her. Kylie was aware of this and did not insist on establishing a connection with her. So what are you planning to do? Gather as much proof as I can. And if she cheats on me? Simply leave her. How will you accomplish that? I have methods and means. She's grown more discreet in recent months. I should have spotted it earlier. It is my own fault, but this is what I got for trusting her. When I recognized what was going on, it was too late to stop. So I prepared for the inevitable. Monday morning, I have a meeting with a private investigator. All I want to know is if she has been doing wicked deeds. I don't require images or videos, however, anything that can aid my case. Unfortunately, you cannot get a divorce in this nation based on adultery. That is true. However, a guy can defend himself if he is smart and acts quickly enough. Fortunately, she waited until the kids left the house before cheating. And there are a few things in our lives she has forgotten that could help me. He patted my shoulder. I apologize, friend. I actually am. I skipped my beer. I agree. The trouble is until I have proof I can't stop loving her. Perhaps it is simply my suspicious mind. Maybe I'm simply a jealous jerk, but friend, the signals are there. I was not paying attention until I recognized what was happening. The next morning, I drove to my father's home. Naomi greeted me as she often did and asked if she might sit with him while I explained the problem. I must have had that expression on my face because, even though it was only 10 a.m., he handed me a bottle of beer and urged me to take my time before he began. I grinned as he took Naomi's hand. They still loved each other as much as they had on their wedding day. Previously, the partnership was short-lived. My father wanted her to be his wife. I believe Kylie is having an affair. Naomi sighed. My dad murmured. Shit, not again. I will employ a private investigator on Monday. But all of the indications are there. Dad. The exact signs you mentioned regarding Mom. All of the signs you informed me about. If she's cheating, she's probably read a book on how to do it successfully. But I got my head out of my ass. So what do you want me to do? I grinned. Naomi giggled as I am sure the smile was not pleasant. Daddy, I am going to give you my house. Remember when you signed your mortgage agreement? Years ago? Kylie never signed the contract. Legally, you and I own the property. And once I'm gone, she'll be nothing more than a tenant. I am selling you the house as a gift by simply deleting my name from the deed under state and federal laws. I can do it for free. So what do we do? Once I divorce our marriage, I will sign a month-to-month lease with you. If it comes to that, you can settle things with Kylie while she retains certain tenant rights. She has lived in this residence for quite some time. We will discuss how you can legally evict her if required by a court order. Unfortunately, due to a plan in my thoughts, I will not be present. Have you thought about this? Mark questioned. Naomi. Kylie and I talked about monogamy and faithfulness before we got married. She is aware of my mother. I told her that if she ever cheated on me, I would not forgive her. I don't care whether it happens once or 100 times. If you sleep with someone else, you are breaching our pledge. This means you're breaking your prenup. At least with this no fault. Nonsense, I can just walk away and not have to pay her anything. No alimony because they don't live at home and no spousal support because she earns as much as I do. Thank goodness we don't have these dreaded alimony laws like some states. Screw paying some cheating bitch a piece of my money. Simply because she can't keep her legs closed. I sipped my beer and gazed at Naomi. Sorry. I'm a little upset about that. I hope I am mistaken. Kylie returned home and curled up on the couch to watch a movie. She smiled at me as usual, her eyes brightening at my presence. Where have you been? She inquired. Meeting with my father. I just needed some advice about something. What is this about? About a job? There might be a new opportunity on the way. The problem was, I simply had suspicions. There was no clear indication that she was doing me bad things. If she was having an affair, it was with someone she did not see on a daily basis. I knew that the day the girls' nights out began unexpectedly would be one of the final straws. But thus far, nothing like that has occurred. She used to remain late at work, but I'd had enough of it. If she was suspicious, she would assume I was cheating on her. On those few times, I worked late before retiring to bed. She snuggled up to me as usual, whispering how much she loved me. It upset me to believe she was lying to me. Perhaps she loved me, but she required something where someone knew. If that were the case, we'd split and she'd be able to find a new guy. I've read fictional stories of women who, for whatever reason, transformed into gigantic sluts and committed horrible acts. The thought of my gorgeous wife indulging in such activities almost made me gag until I had proof that I needed to trust her. It was the old saying, trust but verify. So when I muttered back, "I love you," I really meant it. But the prospect of her betraying our vows became terrible at times. The following day was Monday. I went to work first. Every morning, we ate breakfast together. Then I cleaned my teeth. Everything was the same that morning. Her eyes shone as she told me she loved me and wished me a happy day. I nearly felt horrible knowing that at lunchtime, I would be meeting with a private investigator to set up surveillance on my wife because I suspected she was cheating on me. After 20 years of what I believed was a blissful marriage, I was astonished to be visited by a woman dressed in a trench coat and fedora, resembling an ex-cop with a hate for women. I think I watched too many old movies. She observed my amazement and smiled as she explained the process, what was being offered and how much it would cost. She noticed the money going around. "No, we have separate accounts, but we share a joint account to pay bills and other household expenses. Why do you think she's having an affair?" I described what I'd seen my mother do. Then my father uncovered something which my mother admitted and described the current position. "How's your sex life going?" she finally asked. "It was fine after my son moved out, but around 6 months ago, it slowed again." I assumed we were just pushing it out of our minds. To be honest, I wish I could have intimacy with my wife every night. Just because I am 45 does not imply I am no longer interested in it. Have you observed any shifts in her behavior? Yes, they're scarcely noticeable, yet they're present. You're familiar with the term red flags? She nodded and I grinned. Not quite enough for a communist march, but enough red flags to make me uncomfortable and suspicious. She described what they had to offer. These include phone tapping footage, monitoring, identity tracking, and a variety of other operations, some of which she admits may not stand up to examination, making them potentially illegal. I had to explain that it wasn't a permanent arrangement unless my head was buried in the sand. I had no idea if she was seeing someone on her lunch break while working late or if she was just hooking up when she wanted to experience something different. I had to accept that I simply didn't know and wanted to discover the truth. I was given some time to think about it and told that I may phone on Friday to start surveillance early the following week. It was difficult to give up sex with my wife. I still didn't know the truth, but the idea of sharing her with one or more men made me extremely uneasy. I could have feigned to be ill, but I said the truth. I was just not interested. I know what made her upset when I turned down her advances. She eventually inquired if I was stressed about my job. I was preoccupied with something, so I suppose her curiosity was satiated. As always, she snuggled close to me and said, "I love you." I contacted on Wednesday and urged them to start immediately. I needed to know since this was beginning to drive me insane. I couldn't help but wonder whether it was all just in my brain. It's no surprise that so many cheated on husbands have suffered psychological damage. In the end, despite the fact that I paid for their services and they discovered the evidence, it only took a month of battling back for my wife to finally expose herself in all her beauty. By this point, I was reading every day about cheating spouses, both male and female, all the indicators of infidelity, how they pull the wool over their eyes, and what spouses can do if their marriage fails. I was already ready. I had already begun packing. The car and I had what is known as an evacuation bag. The workers knew I was getting ready to relocate. I only needed to give them a date. Our house was now owned by my father and the leasemaid. No mention of my wife. With any luck, she'd be kicked out of the house within a few months. It was Friday evening. I arrived home at the usual time. When I walked in the door, Kylie was usually in the living room watching TV and drinking wine. We generally order takeout. Talk about our week, maybe make plans for the weekend, snuggle up, and then go to bed before she started acting strangely. Friday nights were generally nice because the kids had finally left the house. We made love all the time, sometimes not stopping till Sunday, but I heard her in the bathroom. I nearly laughed to myself. The situation was so cliché that I took a beer from the kitchen and sat down on the sofa. You never believe it will happen to you. I waited in the dead dark for her to appear. I had anticipated to see a lecherous little black dress. Instead, she wore a mismatched blouse, a short skirt, stockings, and heeled shoes. She had groomed her hair, used cosmetics and jewelry to highlight everything. She was very gorgeous. Unfortunately, that wasn't for me. I did not realize that right away. Mark, I didn't realize you were home. I arrived home at my usual time. Kylie, you've clearly been too busy primping and planning for whatever you're doing. Where are you going? She took a deep breath. I am going on a date tonight. Mark and John from work. Why? It's only for work. It was a blatant falsehood. I knew who he was. He was an affair partner. He worked at her company's headquarters. He was married with children around our age. I'm not sure what she wanted me to say, but there comes a time when a guy simply washes his hands of another man if she had expected me to beg or plead. She clearly didn't know me at all. She was aware of my attitude on monogamy, infidelity, and standing up. She returned my glance as I approached her. I stared at her closely and she finally recoiled. I smiled as I made my way into the kitchen. Are you not going to say anything, Mark? No. She had no idea how ready I was. I suppose we were both good performers. The only difference was that I wasn't destroying her heart with lies. Okay, fair enough. I will be home later. We will talk then. I didn't say anything, just followed her to the door. She paused and returned my gaze as hesitant as I had ever seen her. I wasn't sure whether it was guilt or not. I didn't care anymore. Good night, Mark. She spoke quietly. Hello, Kylie. She must have understood what I was trying to express, but she clearly assumed I was going to be another man I'd heard about who would put up with such nonsense, but I was not a cuckold. I was not going to put up with that nonsense. I was not interested in an open marriage, wife splitting, and other such issues. It emasculates, demeans, and entirely reverses the promises made during marriage. As soon as she departed, I executed my plan. I grabbed my evacuation bag and packed another suitcase, then loaded them into the car. I went online and praised the heavens that in this day and age, everything can be accomplished via a phone app or online. We had very little debt, just one credit card, which I quickly paid off and canceled. I paid all upcoming expenses and then transferred the majority of our money from our joint account to my own. I left her with enough money to cover a month or two of rent and bills. Following that, she was on her own. Possession constitutes 9 to 10 of the law. She did not own the house, and by the time she understood our savings were depleted, I would be gone. As I strolled around the house one final time, I couldn't help but say, so many nice memories are now ruined. I took another mug of beer and prepared to make 3 calls. The first one should be easy. The final 2 would be the most challenging. Dad. It has been confirmed that she is cheating on me. She mustered the courage to admit that she is going on a date with another man tonight. The strategy will now take effect. Where are you going? To Adelaide? I have a new 12-month contract there. When the divorce is finalized, I'll probably return to Sydney, but that's the point. We will wait and see. All okay, son, I will make sure. She does not find out where you are. A new number, I will settle everything as soon as I arrive. I will send you my new address as soon as I locate somewhere to reside. Drive carefully and avoid doing anything dumb. Dad, all I am doing is leaving a cheating marriage. Unfortunately, this time, like father, like son, rings a little hollow. You have done nothing wrong, Mark. Simply find peace in what you are doing and you will soon be able to move on with your life. Please know that Naomi and I love you. Do your children know? I'll phone them next time. Good luck, son. I'll talk to you soon. Calling my children was the most difficult call I've ever made. I called my daughter first. She'll always be Daddy's little girl. When I explained the scenario, she sobbed on the other end of the phone. It hardened my heart to hear my young girl sobbing because her daddy's heart had been destroyed. I promised her that I will always love her. But for the time being, I am leaving. I'll send her an email with all of my new information once I'm situated. But I'm not going to tell anyone anything right now. My son has demonstrated the stoic attitude that I would expect from any young guy. He labeled his mother a whore and his only question for me was what I plan to do with him. I'll find out where he lives and send it to his wife. I admitted that she deserved to know the truth. Aside from that, I have no desire for revenge. Steve, this is not fiction. This is real life. I'm heartbroken right now. But all I'll do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'm only 45 or 46 when the divorce happens. What about counseling? Can she demand it? Marriage isn't like ours here and neither are the divorce laws. Steve, you've read too many stories based on states' laws as long as we've lived apart for 12 months. I can file for divorce since you're both over 18. I won't even be required to attend court. Although I will. Just to make sure everything goes smoothly, she can't require counseling since we've been married for 20 years. Well, I'd be careful, Dad. You know how the courts can be if she's persistent. Enough, then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor. Put the pictures in front of them and ask them if they'll stay married to the woman who's cheating on them. Okay, Dad, we'll take care of yourself and keep in touch when you get to where you're going. I'll keep you in the loop. As I believe Mom will be contacting me. She knows law will protect you. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk soon. That was it. I wrote Kylie a short letter explaining that I was leaving and that she would hear from my father soon. I didn't give her the reason why, leaving it as a bit of a surprise. Other than that, I explained that I had already called our children and told them the truth. Just like my father had. She could tell her parents that I left, but if I started getting insults or requests for reconciliation, I would send them proof. Finally, I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the coffee table along with the note and all the proof I had received. These were copies as I would keep the originals in case I needed to use them for any reason. Getting into the car, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I found that all the stress I had been feeling disappeared as soon as I drove away from the house. I booked a hotel on the western outskirts of the city to prepare for my trip to Adelaide. I had 2 weeks to get there and set up my life. So I took my time and decided to stay in random country towns that had no more than a pub, post office and police station, usually all in one building. A week later, I arrived in Adelaide. I was met at the office where I was to work by several people I recognized from previous corporate conferences. I already knew my role, so knowing I was a stranger in their city, they took me outside and showed me around, recommending neighborhoods where I should live. I ended up staying in a hotel for a month while I picked a place to live. I ended up choosing a modern 3-bedroom apartment in North Adelaide. After researching information and discovering that it was one of the most beautiful suburbs in The city I wasn't interested in buying as the average price was expensive. Although not as bad as Sydney, I intended to return home to Sydney after 12 months. As soon as I moved and changed my room, I informed my father, siblings, and children of the change. In my circumstances, Charlotte called immediately, wanting to visit me. I missed her terribly and arranged for her to fly for a month. My son was finishing his studies, but as Christmas was only 3 months away, he would visit me then so he could stay for a few weeks. As for my father, he let me know what was going on with Kylie. Are you aware that she didn't get home until the next morning? Yes. I didn't distract the private investigators until the next day as I was curious as to what she was doing that night. She went out to dinner with him and it was all quite romantic. Then they spent the night in a hotel in the city. There was nothing else I needed to know. I thanked them for their efforts and paid them as their services were not needed after that. Well, I heard about it through the grapevine and also what she told me. When she returned home, she found her wedding ring, the note, and the evidence. She called me, your children and her family, and hysterics. You obviously didn't answer your cell phone and I know she sent you emails. Any calls from her went to voicemail and were deleted. I marked all emails from her as spam. Well, that was just the beginning of her problems. A week later, I showed up on her doorstep and showed her the lease we signed. Then I showed her the paperwork that you had gifted me the house. Her face turned pale as she realized it was all quite legal. I gave her 3 months to find a suitable place to live, and if she doesn't leave, I'll have the police evict her. She's still living there, but I know she wants to move out. Has she asked about me? Of course. She asked about your family, your children, your friends, even where you work. She's eaten up with guilt for throwing away 20 years of our life together. Has she explained to anyone why? Not really. She's sorry, of course, but I heard the same thing from your mother. She was sorry she got caught. Not sorry she cheated on me. Cheaters always live in a fantasy world where they believe they are doing nothing wrong. The usual nonsense is that it was just sex. I never cheated on my wife or just sex. And believe me, Dad, by the time I was in my 30s and 40s, I was getting plenty of proposals. But I loved my wife and I wouldn't dare back down from my vows. I got a second chance with Naomi. Mark, give yourself time to heal more in your marriage. When you are ready, open your heart to someone else. Mark, there are millions of good ladies in this planet. Thank you, Dad. I love you, son. Take good care of yourself. Work allowed me to distract myself. I ended up going over South Australia, visiting various stores and suppliers and taking time on weekends to explore the region, notably the Barossa Valley. I discovered that divorce had made me a strong negotiator, unwilling to give in unless it benefited my company. At the very least, my managers were pleased with my work performance and were already discussing the possibility of staying in Adelaide permanently. My daughter came to see me a month after I moved into the flat when I was waiting for her at the airport. She yelled, "Daddy," and dashed to me. I embraced her hard and twirled her around. And she burst into tears as I whispered how much I loved her. And that once this was finished, I'd be home for good. She stayed with me for a week, and despite the fact that I was working, I spent the majority of it at home. But when I had a spare moment, we talked about anything came to mind. She told me that her mother had been calling her constantly, attempting to explain her version of the tale. Although I didn't want to provide her the proof, I eventually gave in and presented her the printed report. By the time she stopped reading, she burst into tears and nearly yelled at her mother about how much she despised her. This wasn't my intention, but despite my promises that her mother still loved her, I had a bad feeling it would take her a long time to Forgive her mother if she ever did. The day she left devastated both of us, because I knew she wanted to stay with me merely to keep me company. I hugged her for what seemed like hours before she had to leave. I never cried during the months that my marriage fell apart. It made me irritated, but not upset. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried briefly in the car as my daughter drove away. It made me realize that I was lonely, yet her visit also revived me. I spoke with her every night. My son called me at least every few days. My siblings knew what had happened. And my younger sister promised to come see me as soon as she could. My father kept me updated about everything that was going on. Even the guys from my old Sydney workplace seemed to be aware of some of the happenings, although they mostly called to chat and joke. It was 6 weeks till Christmas, when lightning struck again. I writhed with boredom as I went through the aisles of the nearby supermarket. Kylie and I would often go grocery shopping together. We always had a good time laughing at one another and acting silly. I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, unaware that another woman was doing the same. Our hands collided and we both turned to look at each other. I believe my jaw dropped slightly and her cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, it's my fault. I hadn't noticed you. Kindly accept the bottle. I could get something else instead. I just can't take it. This is the last one." I'm not sure where I got my confidence for what I said next. "Tell you what, you'll take the bottle if you drink coffee with me later." I had absolutely no notion who she was, what her name was, or anything else. But that touch sparked an interest in me, and the sheer beauty of her face compelled me to learn more about her. I reached out my hand. "I am Mark." She smiled, grasping my hand and feeling how silky her skin was. "I'm Jennifer." "Mark, do you often pick up ladies in supermarkets?" "No, you're the first." "And are you sure I'm not married?" "If you aren't, I'll revoke my invitation. If so, I hope you will say yes." She was a brunette with hair nearly reaching her shoulders. Her beautiful blue eyes were shielded by a pair of thin, rimmed black glasses perched on her little nose. Her lips were large, but genuine, and her features were classically lovely. I had no idea what age she was. I wanted to study her more closely, but I refrained. Despite the fact that I estimated she was 6 inches shorter than me. I'm not sure what she thought of me in return. But judging from her smile, she loved what she saw. "I want to get some coffee. Why don't you give me your phone number?" Giving her my phone number. She sent me a text. "I'll finish my shopping in approximately 30 minutes. Then I'll need to take this home and store it. However, if you want, I can meet with you in a few hours." "Do you live locally?" "Yes, I do live nearby. Do you agree?" "Same. I despise driving too far to do grocery shopping. Tell me where you are and I will meet you there." She pushed the trolley forward and rested a hand on my forearm. "I'll see you soon, Mark." It's been much too long since I went on a coffee shop date. I caught the tone and met her gaze. I could see the sorrow in their eyes just as I saw it in my own whenever I looked in the mirror. "I'll text you when I come home to let you know where I will be." After finishing the rest of my shopping, I took advantage of the self-service and virtually ran home, dumping everything into the fridge and cupboards before bathing and changing. Before I left, I texted Jennifer to see if she liked the neighboring coffee shop I'd grown to enjoy since moving into the area. She responded a few minutes later, confessing that she frequently visits the same store and asking if we had seen each other before. I admit that I was a little worried while waiting for her to come. I had dated my wife during our marriage, but this was my first actual date in 20 years. She went in overdressed, wearing a stunning sundress. We just started talking after I bought her a drink. She revealed that she was really amazed at my confidence in asking her out in the middle of a crowded supermarket. But Mark, I felt something when you touched my hand. So it wasn't only me. She flushed, but nodded. No, I've read about similar things before. But I believe it's just fantasy. She extended her hand to me and we smiled as I closed my palm around hers. I just felt it again. She muttered. I definitely felt it. We didn't dig too deeply into the story. Not during a first date. I knew her name. She was single and she grinned as she showed me her left hand. It was evident that a ring had once been on the third finger. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, but did not have any of her own children. She resided alone in a little apartment. She had a couple of close friends. Her parents resided in a metropolis. She had a younger sister and was 35 years old. I said so. 45, Mark, I do not care how old you are. I only care about the kind of man you are. When she said that, I realized I had broken up with my wife. Noticing her apprehensive expression, I asked if she needed another drink because an explanation would be required. I was hesitant to tell her everything. On our first meeting, she made me happy by saying no, Mark. For the time being, I put my trust in you. I see that you are in pain. Is this that obvious? He broke my heart and I saw the same sight in the mirror. She grasped my hand again and squeezed it. It gets easier, but only one day at a time, then weeks and months pass. The person who destroyed your heart will quickly be forgotten. She grinned again. And maybe you'll meet the person who begins to mend that very heart. It's simply that some folks take longer than others. However, it does happen eventually. My father used to say the exact same thing. Your father is a clever person. We finished our second class and went outside to walk to her car. I felt embarrassed, unsure whether to kiss her, hug her, or simply wish her well. While hugging her, a part of me did not want to let her go. I couldn't imagine falling in love again so rapidly. I suppose we both didn't want to break our embrace. Call me this week, Mark. I'd love to talk with you again. What about tonight? She laughed and it was a stab to the heart. You are welcome to call me whenever you wish. I called her that night and every night thereafter, to avoid disrupting her normal teacher's week. I asked if she wanted to go out to dinner on Friday night and she said yes. I virtually danced around the apartment as soon as I got off the phone. I hadn't felt this excited in a long time. At the seminar on Thursday, more than one individual commented on my cheerful demeanor. Everyone was aware of my split and imminent divorce. So they believed I was seeing someone. Not wanting to jinx things, I told them how much I enjoyed my date at the coffee shop and that I would be having dinner with the same person the next night. I also mentioned that I had no interest in going on dates. I would go out with one woman at a time. If it didn't work out, I'd try another. I found a restaurant with outstanding recommendations online, but I had never been there before. It was an informal dining area, yet the food was said to be good despite the relaxed ambience. I still wore trousers rather than jeans, a long-sleeved button-down shirt, leather shoes, and cologne. Despite the fact that my stubble was kept to a minimum. The restaurant featured a bar and I smiled when Jennifer was waiting for me. She seemed quite nervous. When she noticed me approaching, she stood up and I leaned in to kiss her without thinking. She quickly kissed me back. Wow, she murmured and drew away from me. If you're just going to greet me like that on our second date, I'd like to do it at the conclusion of our first. A waiter approached us and showed us to our seats. Fortunately, the booth was divided into a narrow semicircle, allowing us to sit side by side. After ordering our beverages, we talked about our weeks. It was impossible not to notice how enthusiastic she was about teaching, but when she admitted that she wanted to have her own children, I began chatting about mine. I believe we were both upset when the waiter returned and inquired about our order as it disturbed the conversation. We decided to split the appetizer and dessert, with everyone receiving the main entree. I was astounded by how quickly the talk flowed. Her face mesmerized me. Her own voice, her behavior, she must have caught my sight several times as she reddened. The dinner was fantastic. No complaints. The waiters and servers were courteous without being too intrusive. After dinner, I paid, but she suggested we go to Holland's before I asked if she wanted another drink. She agreed quickly. I took her hand and brought her into a bar. I looked up information online. It was a calm setting. A man at a piano was playing background music. There were several more booths here. Jennifer was drinking a cocktail while I was sipping a bourbon with a mixer. "Mark, what's wrong?" she eventually asked. I told her absolutely everything. We discussed our life together, our children, and our careers. But then I told my father about what had transpired in my relationship with my mother, not working out, divorce, and what I learned. Then I discovered my wife was doing the same thing. Then I disclosed how I left and what I had done a few weeks prior. I am still married, Jennifer, but we live separately. I moved here to ensure the divorce goes through. I'm not sure if what I'm doing is cheating. I don't blame you if you do. But my marriage is ended. It exists solely by name. I will return to Sydney to ensure that the divorce is finalized. And if you meet somebody here, I'd chat to him about our possibilities. My children are in Sydney. It's difficult to be so far from them. I had to turn away because acknowledging it upset me. I missed them on a daily basis. Mark, my ex-husband, was quite the piece of work. When I was 19, he completely swept me off my feet. He was 25 at the time. The age gap did not worry me, but my parents warned me about him. But I was in love and didn't listen. I didn't see the warning signs that appeared after a few months. I was shocked that he let me go to work. But that was all I was permitted to do. He gradually cut me apart from my family and friends. I was supposed to teach school and then come home and virtually become his maiden whore. She paused, and I knew in my gut that this was just the beginning of the story. I guess things got worse from there. I responded to him, which meant I was disrespectful to my spouse. I was dressed like a whore or arrived home late. That suggests I was deceitful. I was spending money on items that I wanted. That implied I lacked financial responsibility. He never spoke positively. He was a sea of complete negativity. I can't imagine wanting to say something nice about you, Jennifer. I replied softly. I realized I needed to get away. He was crazy. And I knew that one day he would either hit me and put me in the hospital or completely destroy me. I contacted my father and cried over the phone begging him to help me. He arrived with two of my uncles and a couple of his buddies. My ex-husband tried to beat them off, but pushing and striking a woman is not the same as fighting off a man or men. Since my father cleared watch with a single punch and was then tied to a chair while they assisted me in moving out, I immediately went to the police and obtained a restraining order and an AWOL against him. I have been divorced for 7 years. And he has no idea where I am. I haven't dated Mark very long. I've been terrified for so long. She raised her eyes and gazed into mine. Then we met. And I experienced feelings I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd never had feelings for him. She went behind the wheel, but it was unsafe to drive. I volunteered to drive her home. Stopping in front of an apartment complex, I realized I had considered it before settling into my own home. She paused when she opened the front door after being escorted inside. I made my decision. I drew her close and kissed her again. I had a fantastic night, Jennifer. I would like to spend it again during the week. You can spend any night you desire. I can cook quite well in the kitchen. If you want to have dinner with me, let me know what night and I'll bring something. I'm a decent cook myself. She gave a smile. So I'll cook first, then you'll cook for me and we'll compare the outcomes. What night is it? Wednesday, Mark, although I anticipate your normal nightly call and a slew of messages. If you play your cards well, you can even receive a surprise or two in a message. What are you going to do tomorrow? Nothing. Why not go to the beach? You only want to see me in a bikini. No. Simply want to have a nice time. When I came home, I heard my phone ding a few times, but didn't open it until I was inside, sitting on the couch with a beer in hand. I had a fantastic night, Mark. I wanted to spend the night with you, but I don't want to rush things. I don't want to rush things either. Bring a change of clothes with you on Wednesday night. I hope you will stay. Then it is too early to do anything, then sleep in the same bed. Mark, I'm tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer. So am I. I'm already in my bed. It's regal, but it feels hollow. It didn't feel like that before I met you. A.M. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. I will take you out to breakfast first and then we will head to the beach. J, what is your favorite color? M is typically blue on women, but can also be black or red. J, then I have the ideal bikini for you. I'll see you in the morning, Mark. M, sweet dreams. Beautiful. The final message was a love heart. And the next morning, a honk came from outside her apartment complex at me. I knocked on the door and could hear her calling me inside. She acknowledged me with a smile. What do you say? Do you have a broom? I'll have to fight off the men. Her smile grew when she vanished. Returning in t-shirt and shorts, she grabs her bag. I put it in the trunk of the car next to mine and took her to a beachside cafe for a modest but filling breakfast. By the time we were ready to tan, the beach was already full. We spent the entire day at the beach, venturing down to the sea a few times. Do you want to remain and drink? I'd love to, but if I stay, I don't want to go. She stepped up to me and told me to go home and change clothes. She murmured, "Come back, have a drink and stay the night." I rushed into the home with my belongings, packed my suitcase, grabbed the necessities and dashed to her. When I knocked on the door out of breath, she opened it and smiled, grabbed my shirt. She hauled me in, slammed the door shut and forced me back onto the couch. The next morning, she cooked me breakfast and we spent the day lounging around her apartment. Any amount of silence was pleasant. I said, "Take your time, Jenny. We have no shortage of time." I knew I was in love with her and I could see she was feeling the same way. The only problem was I prayed it wasn't a withdrawal. I had recently left my wife of 20 years and had fallen in love with the first woman I saw. But I wanted to believe fate had brought us together. There was a reason. We ended up in the grocery store that day. We didn't text as often during the day because she was busy, but we did communicate every night. The guys at work knew I was dating someone, so I informed my family in Sydney that I had met someone special. My father contacted and kept me informed. About Kylie. She was apparently about to move out. She was still looking for me, but no one would give her any information. She assumed I was still in Sydney and hoped to meet up with me eventually. Wednesday night couldn't arrive soon enough. Jennifer had cooked a delicious and hearty dinner, and the dessert she created for us struck a chord with me. I added, touching myself on the stomach. It is commonly stated that the road to a man's heart is through his stomach. I love you, she said softly, turning to kiss her. I couldn't help but smile. I love you too, I said quietly. Isn't it too early? No, absolutely not, Jenny. If that is how we feel about each other, then so be it. I felt it on our first date over a cup of coffee. I realized I'd found the man I'd like to spend the rest of my life with, and I mean, if you want to be closer to your children, I'll accompany you. Are you sure? This is a significant decision. Mark, there's nothing keeping me here. My parents are still well. My sister is in a happy marriage. I'm not going to make a decision right now, but my heart screams I should come with you. I would love to meet your kids. They'll be here at Christmas. Then you'll all come to celebrate Christmas with my family. That night she made her first visit to my apartment. She referred to it as bachelor. Yet it was clean and neat, even though she understood why. I kept things simple because it was merely a temporary residence at the time of marriage. She reddened and turned away, tenderly clasping her wrist. I admit that I was also thinking about it. Jenny, I cannot recall the last time I felt this much love for Kylie. I don't say that because she crushed my heart and cheated on me. Perhaps we have been on a roll for all these years. Perhaps it is because it is new. Perhaps it is simply because I am older and have more life experience. But I absolutely adore you, Jennifer Morrissey. And one day I hope to be Jennifer Williams, she responded in a whisper. For the next 3 weeks, everything was perfect. We were not apart for a single night. To be honest, we spent more nights in her apartment than in mine because it was much nicer. She called my father multiple times and I kept my children informed. But they didn't want to speak until they met her in person. After calling my son the week before Christmas, I had to inquire about his mother and her activities. I told her I wouldn't be here for Christmas. I believe she guessed you were not in Sydney. Lafty despises her daddy. I mean, complete loathing. She's only spoken to her once since you left. And ever since that phone call, she has seldom spoken to her. I talked with your sister last night. She will be here in a few days. What about grandfather and Naomi? I'll talk to them when I return to Sydney. Jenny will most likely join me. We'll need to get her a job and buy a home as close as feasible so she doesn't have to commute. Are you positive you don't want to stay there, Dad? Lafty and I have been chatting and we're thinking about moving there to be closer to you. I know your sister is also thinking about it. Jennifer listened intently and squeezed my hand. Are you sure about this, Steve? You will leave behind all of your friends and relatives. Dad, you're more important. Believe me. When Lafty arrives in a couple of days, she'll be sure to say it. Her husband will be in favor as well. He despised living in Sydney. I couldn't help but peek at Jennifer, surprised. I'll still have to return to ensure the divorce goes through. Steve, don't make hasty conclusions. I understand how that seems, but my decision to leave your mother in this manner was planned in before. I am well aware of that, Dad. I'm not interested in her. She's still trying to persuade people that she didn't do anything wrong and that it was your fault for leaving. Jennifer traveled with me to the airport. My daughter arrived on this day. Her husband, Tom, accompanied her. However, as soon as Charlotte noticed me, she dropped her belongings and raced to me. It was like the days when I used to pick her up from school, and she was overjoyed to see me. She cried again for a few minutes, and when I presented her to Jennifer, they were both in tears. I looked at Tom and shrugged helplessly. The next day, my kid knocked on my flat door, surprising me. "Daddy," he exclaimed aloud, and we embraced. The scoundrel hugged me tightly, and we both had to wipe our cheeks as I walked him inside to meet Jennifer. "At the very least, he resembles you rather closely," she spoke. I knew what she meant, but I'd already taken the DNA test. Kylie hadn't cheated on me so early in our relationship, but I still wanted confirmation. Later that morning, I drove the five of us to Jennifer's parents' home. The trunk was full with goodies, and I delivered them all. Her mother fell in love with my daughter in 2 minutes. And I'm confident that my boy was recognized as one of their own grandchildren. Just as they acknowledged me as their son, I used an online video service to contact my father and exchange Christmas greetings. My brother, his wife, my sister, her husband, and their children joined him for Christmas. Kylie had long since left our old house and moved in with her folks. The news that startled me was that her affair partner was evicted from the house by his wife, who used evidence to get him fired for egregious misconduct. Apparently, my wife was hanging on by a thread in her job, but she was demoted and lost several common friends who couldn't forgive her for cheating. It was an excellent day. My kids shot a lot of images for their social media profiles. I'd long since lost interest in such things, thinking they were a waste of time. However, I quickly received messages from a few old friends who had contacted my father and asked whether he knew my phone number. Many people were curious about what happened, so I gave a simple answer. Others provided me information on Kylie, but I said it didn't matter. As soon as the 12 months were over, I would file for divorce and return to Sydney to ensure it took effect. Jennifer and her family spent a fantastic Christmas together. When she mentioned coming to Sydney with me, I informed her that we would be staying in Adelaide and that someone from my family would be joining us instead. Her face brightened up, and I almost had her in tears. When I finally gave her the thing I desired, I was still formally married, so it was too early to propose. So I bought her a lovely necklace and bracelet. She put them on right away and promised to wear them as much as possible. After a hearty meal, her father offered me a beverage, and we ended up in his garage where he had put an old sports car on wheels. I have not seen Jenny this joyful in a long time, Mark. Partly, I believe that leaving Adelaide would be beneficial. But would you be glad to stay here indefinitely? I'll stay here for her, and my children will relocate to be closer. How quickly can you finalize the divorce? Several months at most. I've been open and honest with Jenny from the beginning. I understand she has been treating you badly. Yes. Possibly up to 6 months. I only have concrete evidence in the last few weeks before pulling the pin. He shook his head. I've read about all this cheating crap. Why, Mary, if you can't keep your legs closed? Have you ever heard of cuckold? He knew what it was based on his disgusted expression. Yeah, I'm not sure if Kylie meant that, but it's one of the new nonsense. The same idea applies to all of these people who seek a free relationship, so you can cheat while keeping your conscience clean. To be honest, if my wife had asked me to do that, I'd be in jail. How disrespectful is it to ask someone to do anything like that? Jenny's ex-husband was a cheater and an abuser. What? He placed a hand on my shoulder. She was unaware of the infidelity, but he did it with everyone who moved. He gripped my shoulder. Mark, she loves you. Please do not hurt her heart. Please, I am not sure I can stomach another call like that from my small kid. He took a sip from his bottle and added quietly while looking aside. I almost completely wrecked it. Mark, I adore her more than anything in the world. Daddy. He grinned and started calling me son. I'd been seriously hurt, so we both bear the wounds in our hearts and minds. We help one another. We stayed until late afternoon, and my daughter drove us home because I'd had too much to drink. When I returned to my apartment, the children had gone to bed, and Jennifer dragged me into our bedroom. If it was good, she would have had a more enjoyable New Year's Eve. I encouraged my children to have fun as I walked her to a downtown hotel. After dinner and drinks, I led her back to our room where there was a bottle of champagne and some appetizers. Do you have any New Year's wishes? I inquired. No, not just one. Would you like to hear them? Sure, I want you to live here with me. Deal. I want you to propose to me as soon as you get divorced. I'm already looking for rings. She clutched to me even closer. I would like to have a baby. She spoke something quietly. Jennifer will marry and start a family. My kids left a few days later. I was reluctant to let them go, but when I mentioned that I would most likely stay in Adelaide if they wanted to join me, they vowed to look into their alternatives. I contacted my father to tell him the same thing. He told me I had to make the right decision for me, but he was content being with Naomi. But of course, he would pay me visits whenever he could. The next few months were blissful. I eventually applied for an apartment lease and moved in with Jennifer. I won't say it was a fairy tale romance after all. It was really life. But I don't recall feeling happier. We worked together in every aspect of our lives. She was aware that my divorce loomed on the horizon, and at times lingered in my mind. We both still had trust issues, but we agreed to always discuss any problems without giving the other reason to believe we were doing anything wrong. Our lives were fantastic and we never stopped seeing each other. Simply being in her presence made me feel better about myself. She made me want to be a better man. She thought it was perfect. Jennifer, on the other hand, showed me so much love that when I was ready to return to Sydney, I had already purchased an engagement ring. She was more nervous than I was on the flight because she knew there could still be banana skins. My father, siblings, and children met us at the airport. We would stay with my dad while the divorce was being finalized. I had already filed the papers, but the lawyer informed me that Kylie was trying to contest the divorce, sitting with Jennifer in his office. I was shocked that she was even trying to prevent it. I haven't seen her in 12 months, I stated. I followed the letter of the law. I can even prove that. I have lived in Adelaide for the last year and she has not lived with me during that. What's more, we haven't been in touch at all. That's true, but she can still argue that, he replied. No judge will listen to her arguments and no counseling will be forced. I assume Jennifer is your partner. Kylie cheated on me. That's the original reason. Now I have a more compelling reason to divorce her. Once we're divorced, I'll propose to Jenny and we'll get married as soon as possible. We plan to have children after the divorce. Jennifer added. Okay, I'll talk to her lawyer and find out what she wants. There's really not much she can do. But a smart lawyer will be able to fight it. 3 days later, I heard from my attorney. Kylie would sign her name to the divorce agreement, so the petition would be joint. And therefore the case would proceed without delay. If I agreed to talk to her one last time, I discussed with Jennifer, who supported me, whatever I chose to do. My attorney suggested that I just talk to her to get things settled. My father agreed. You're with Jennifer. Now, son, he stated, you're getting married, starting a new family, and your kids will be with you in Adelaide soon. Are you still angry with her? Not really. I've gotten over it. I guess you haven't. It's her own fault. And I understand why I don't want to see her, but let her speak her mind and then just put it all behind you. Okay, I'll talk to my lawyer and he'll sort it out. The very next week we found ourselves in court. My lawyer explained that once the meeting was finalized and she signed the papers, the judge would be ready to sign off on our divorce and I would be a free man. 1 month and 1 day after the judge issued the divorce decree, I hadn't seen Kylie since the night she left for her date. She was waiting in the room when Jennifer and I approached my attorney. He explained that Kylie was inside with her attorney and no one else taking Jennifer's hand. I led her and the lawyer into the room. Kylie looked up in shock when she saw that I had entered with another woman. Barely glancing at her, I guided Jennifer to a vacant chair and pulled it out, as always, making sure she was comfortable while I sat down in the chair in the middle. My lawyer to my left, taking Jennifer's left hand in my right hand. I made our hands rest on the table in full view of everyone. She pulled her chair as close to mine as possible and rested her head on my shoulder. Finally, I looked at Kylie. To be honest, she looked like shit. I'd heard often enough that Kylie's life hadn't been easy since I'd left her. I had no sympathy for her in the slightest. She had made a choice that had cost her everything. She had no contact with her daughter at all. Our son barely spoke to her at all. My whole family cut off all contact with her, and from what I heard, even her own family was disappointed but felt they had to accept her once my father kicked her out of the house. Okay, have your say, Kylie, so we can get this divorce over with. I have my own life. I'd like to start, and you're in the past where you belong. Who is she? She asked quietly. Who? The woman at your side. That's Jennifer Morris. As soon as our divorce is finalized, I will propose to her in 1 day. She will be Jennifer Williams. And I will naturally say yes to his proposal because I want nothing more than to be his wife and the mother of his future children. I smiled for a moment, though I didn't take my gaze away from Kylie's eyes. As soon as she says yes, we'll organize a simple wedding ceremony. With any luck, by the time we're married, she'll be carrying our child. I knew it hurt to hear all this. I still knew my soon-to-be ex-wife, and the pain in her eyes was real. You recovered very quickly, she stated. I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie. It was you. I remember leaving evidence. You never gave me an explanation. I left that night and you never said anything. You didn't fight for me. I didn't have to fight for you because I was your damn husband. So in the end, you weren't worth fighting for. You cheated on me, Kylie. You showed your true colors after 20 years together. I remember our talks about monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you turned out to be like my mother, I wouldn't hesitate to leave. All you've done is make my decision easier. Do you even regret what you did? Don't bother answering that because you don't. You only regret getting caught not proving that our marriage was nothing but a damn sham and you're a worthless whore just like my own mother. Her lawyer cleared his throat. I stared at him. Back off, if you don't like what I'm saying. She wants to talk. Fine. I have the right to speak to. I made a mistake. Treason isn't a mistake. Treason is a series of decisions you made. I don't care if he seduced you, or if you went out on purpose. The simple fact is that you slept with him and therefore lost any right to call me your husband. It was just sex, and there it is. The precise statement that so many whores use to excuse their decision. I'm sorry, but most people connect sex with love. And considering you were my wife, I was the one you should have been doing it with. Not some stinking moron you were working with. We talked about this before we were married. Kylie, you just don't remember. I warned you again. What would happen if you cheated on me? You forget that my mother cheated too. As soon as I lifted my head out of my ass, I what you were doing. So I just had to gather proof. If you had answered no that night, would you still have left? Yes. I would have left. Either way, but I would have left in a different way. What you did that night was so very rude. You earned everything that happened subsequently. You took all our money. Consider it payment for 20 squandered years. I paused and shook my head. No, that's not really fair, right? You gave me our 2 children. It wasn't a waste. I also verified that they were mine. That upset her. I never cheated on you. Then? No. You only turned into a whore thereafter. You sold our house? No, I handed it to my father. It remains in his name and he rents it out. He has already told me that he will sell it and give me the majority of the proceeds so that I can buy another house near where I currently live. You didn't give me a chance because you clearly didn't deserve one. Kylie, where do you currently live? None of your business. I don't want you to know that. You no longer mattered to me after I left. Our children have reached adulthood and can choose who they want to spend special occasions with, whether it's a birthday or a holiday. She fell silent, knowing that nothing she said would convince me to change my mind. Simply sign the papers and move on with your life. Jennifer stated that he hasn't seen or spoken to you in 12 months. He has accepted the situation. He and I both love each other. We plan to marry, start our own family and grow old together. You chose to leave him. I am glad I was the one who caught him. I hugged him. I whispered that everything would be fine and I'd never let him down. He owns both my heart and I have his. I did not intend to. She looked into my eyes and I saw tears. I remained composed. Water. This time fireworks were ineffective against me. Mark, I still love you. Great for you. I don't care. Kylie. I said coldly. The tone almost caused her to jump. I no longer hate you. Don't let the cold tone fool you. I just do not care about you anymore. You stopped being my problem when you allowed another man to do this. We sat in silence until her lawyer cleared his throat. Kylie's lawyer stated that this is clearly not going anywhere. Simply sign the papers to conclude this farce. He is clearly going to step further by indicating that he intends to marry again. No judge worth his salt would oppose that. Your marriage has ended. Your kids are grown. You no longer share any common property. It's over. Do the proper thing. Sign the paperwork and get on with your lives. He took the papers from the folder and placed them in front of her. Then extended a pen to her. When Kylie met my gaze, she burst into tears. I knew her well enough to know she was genuinely upset. Wiping her cheeks, she took the offered pen with a trembling hand and scanned the papers. She signed and dated right at the bottom. Is my presence in the courtroom required? I asked my lawyer. No, Mark, you are free to go. You'll get the divorce decree in the mail. Good. Then we're finished. Jennifer rose to her feet and took my hand and I let her out of the room. I am sorry, Mark. I overheard her say. I'll always love you. I appreciated the apology even though it was no longer meaningful. Too little, too late. But as for the last 3 words, I believe she still loved me. But I didn't mind. The woman I loved was now grasping my hand. And in a month or a few days, she would be my bride. Going outside. My father, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte waited for us at the cafe. Gesturing to my head. We continued walking to the nearest pub because I was thirsty after purchasing mugs for each of us. We sat down at a table and I explained what the discussion was about. They teared up when I admitted that it was most likely just me talking, outlining everything I wanted to say. How did she look? I inquired Charlotte. Like shit, she appears to be her age or older. Definitely earned the upgrade. Jennifer is speaking in my ear. Did she sign the documents? My father asked, nodding. We clinked our glasses and drank our beers. I went through the same ordeal with your mom. I believe everything Kylie told you. She also tried to tell me. Dad, she wasn't trying to blame me. Mom was accusing you of working too much. Was she trying to justify it? I inquired with Stephen. Yeah, that's the old line. It was just sex. What's up with these promiscuous women claiming it was just sex? Charlotte mused almost to herself. I married my husband and would never consider leaving him just for that. If I want something, I turn to my husband and achieve it. She paused and blushed, realizing that she had just said that in front of her father and grandfather. We exchanged glances and laughed. Okay, said the girl. Very well said, my father burst out. And those are words you can live with. Your grandfather has no chance, Naomi announced. And if he needs some chemical assistance, he knows what else he can use. Naomi, that's my grandfather. Charlotte exclaimed. He isn't dead, nor am I. I'm 65 years old and still very capable. Naomi raised an objection. Your grandfather met me at the appropriate age, but once we were together, we promised to be good to one another. We had both ended our marriages due to infidelity. I am just glad it is almost over. I did admit I dislike being another divorcee, but as I stated in the room, infidelity is unforgivable. Fair play to those who choose to make a relationship work. Perhaps if your kids had been 10 years younger, I would have felt trapped. But I then looked at my father. It wasn't easy. Nonetheless, he was always there for me. We stayed in Sydney for a few more days while I spoke with my family about their plans. Charlotte and Tom immediately agreed to visit Adelaide. Stephen was still considering his options, but was likely to join us. My sister surprised me by offering to join us for dinner when she arrived. Alone. I learned that her marriage had also ended. You can stay with us while you figure things out. Jennifer suggested that any family would welcome you. You're now a member of my family. And my family is now yours as well. I'm selling the house here and we're going to profit from it. I explained, housing prices in Adelaide are much lower than here, so we're going to buy a large house with plenty of room for the kids. Jennifer suggested taking my hand and placing it on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child shortly. How many do you want, Mark? You can have as many as you want, Jenny. I enjoy being a father. A month later, I received a divorce decree declaring that my marriage to Kylie, who did not keep her last name, was officially over. I never heard from her again, but rumor has it that she left Sydney within 6 months of our divorce. According to Stephen, the only person still in contact with her, she went north to Queensland to start over. After that, I stopped asking and Stephen stopped telling me because I didn't care what she was doing. 2 days after getting the divorce decree, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach in front of our families. She could barely speak, nodding as I slipped the engagement ring on her finger. 6 months later, we were married on the same beach, just a few hundred meters from our new home. Everyone noticed her baby as she walked towards me in her wedding gown. But my future wife just glowed as her father led her to me and took her hand. We couldn't keep our smiles as we turned to face the celebrant. My loved ones, we have gathered here today. Epilogue. I'm 1 year away from retirement and my life couldn't be better. Jennifer and I have been married for nearly 20 years and we are as happy as the day we met. This is our first date. Our first love, arranging all of those first meetings leading up to our wedding. Day 6 after returning to Adelaide. My daughter and son lived in Adelaide following their trip to Sydney. My daughter and Tom are still married and have 3 grandchildren. My son married a wonderful man and they have 2 children together. My father and Naomi moved in with us in Adelaide a year after the divorce, where he spent nearly 10 years before dying peacefully in his sleep. Naomi was heartbroken, so we insisted she move in with us right away. She resisted for a while until she realized how large our house was, and we ended up building a granny apartment so she could maintain her independence. My sister moved in with us in Adelaide almost immediately after my husband left, along with the children and her brother. She was the victim of infidelity and he did not fight back when she abducted his children. We found her a place to live while she was staying with us for a few months. She married one of my co-workers and good friends, and they've been happily married for 15 years. My brother remained in Sydney and was the only one who communicated with our mother. At the age of 60, I found out she had died after we hadn't spoken in nearly 40 years. When I learned of her death, I couldn't shed a tear. Jennifer suggested that we go to her funeral. After all, once again it was about becoming a better person, so we all traveled to Sydney to attend the funeral. I was surprised to discover that she had remarried and practically adopted her husband's children as her own. They were not surprised to learn of our existence, but were surprised that she did not admit to being estranged from 2 of her 3 children. We could have explained why we were estranged, but funerals are not the occasion. We simply stated that we were here to pay our final respects before returning home, as there were no relatives in Sydney. Within a year, my brother had moved into our Adelaide home. Jennifer and I ended up having 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My older daughter and son were overjoyed to have siblings and enjoyed babysitting, even though Jennifer and I didn't go out much, but we still loved each other deeply, cared about each other's companionship, never went to bed angry, and our lives are just as vibrant today as they were when we first slept together. I looked back on my life during my divorce. I'm sure there were those who would have preferred that I give in to my ex-wife. What would have been the point? The fact that I left without saying anything only made her feel worse. And I kept quiet for a year before returning to ensure the divorce was finalized. She was aware of my thoughts on fidelity and breached the contract. I don't agree with those who believe in reconciliation either. If your wife cheats and you find the strength to forgive her, that is your decision. However, trust is broken, and can it ever be completely restored? I don't believe it can. You will spend the rest of your life filled with suspicion and resentment, and divorce is almost certainly inevitable. Instead, I followed a well-traveled path. There was no true vengeance, at least not to the point of burning everything to the ground. But there was no chance of reconciliation. I simply walked away, deciding to move on without Kylie. I met Jennifer, my one true soulmate. I still believe that the meeting in the supermarket was fake. I'm not religious, but I'm sure there are ancient religions that mention gods of fate. Are you prepared, Mark? I turned around to see my wife looking stunning in a red ball gown. I see you still possess the old magic. Has there been any word on the children? They're either on their way or about to leave. What about the young people? They'll be fine. Without us for one evening unless they burn down the place. So we have time to have some fun. Yes, of course, I adore you, husband. My wife, I love you. More years of happiness. I sincerely hope so. I'll tell the kids that they won't be staying long. They'll understand why. Thank you for taking the time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this article, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to tell about your or someone else's situation, please do not hesitate to contact me. Please take care.